you've been here for like 2 months at this point.
2 months, yeah. And then when I leave tomorrow, I got like 6 hours in London.
Yeah.
I got to sit around. So I'll just like continue to work on the laptop.
We sound like tech people right now as we have these conversations. We're like, oh, you know, I got to get on my plane tomorrow. I stay here. I like it here. I'm having a good time. We're in, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, we're located out of the Czech Republic. That's where we are right now. And I'm here with Matthew Boyko. Did you, when I said Waystar Boyko before, did you know what that is a reference to?
I have no idea what that was.
It's from the TV show. I haven't even watched it, actually. It's from the TV show Succession, which everyone says is really good. They got like a bunch of like, not Grammys. Grammys music. Tonys is the theater. Oscars is the movies. What's the one for TV? There's like the award that you get that I can't remember the name of.
I have no idea.
Someone's gonna know. Now we're gonna look like fools on the podcast.
I don't want to say because it's not gonna be right.
It's not Grammy. It's not Tony. It's not Oscar. It's Emmy. It's an Emmy award. Emmy is TV. So it won like a bunch of Emmys, like several years in a row. It was when so you know Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
and,
loved it.
And Better Call Saul, the sequel.
You loved it.
So I didn't see Better Call Saul, but I know that the main guy, Saul, whatever that's a big actor too, and I don't remember his name. He was like up for awards several times. And I think, I could be remembering this wrong, I think Succession kept like knocking him out over and over. And he eventually like won an Emmy for like best lead actor, kind of like Bryan Cranston did for, I'm pretty sure he won as well for Breaking Bad. My knowledge here is pretty shaky, so I don't actually know.
I'm terrible with actors' names.
Yeah. And the other guy, he's like, I'm pretty sure, I don't want to say something dumb on here. I'm pretty sure, yeah, the other guy, he's definitely a big actor. And he's been in many different shows, the one for Better Call Saul. But he kept getting knocked out by Succession.
So what's the Waystar reference?
So it's the company that they have in the show. It's like all of them. I'm pretty sure that they are a reference to the big family who owns Fox News, whose name I also can't remember. Do you know who that is?
Is that it's not the Koch family, is it? Or
Coke, like the drink or the drug?
No, the person.
The person? Oh,
the family.
I was sure it was one of those two things when you said it. No, it's the very obvious, easy to remember name. Maybe I shouldn't approach politics, but it's a very powerful family out of Australia, and everyone watching is going to know the name. I'm just blanking on it right now. But the creator of that show swears that there's not any connection, but it's like clearly based off that family, the one that owns Fox News, because it's like an older dude. He's owned it for decades, and his family is kind of set to inherit it. This is my loose understanding without having watched the show or being intricately involved in politics, but that's as far as I understand. And it's kind of mirroring that in the show of showing like the life of these billionaires who are sort of disconnected from your like everyday reality. And that show, it's known for being like one of the best shows on television. It's supposed to be, or like modern shows.
Maybe I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I believe it was like rounded off. I think it's done now, like within the past like year or two. I'm like reaching deep into my memories here, but I'm pretty sure it's done at this point. And that company that they had is called Waystar Royco because it was my trivia team's name, which is why I know it. We called ourselves Waystar Royco because my friend watched the show and he liked it. So when I saw your name, Matthew Boyko, just to round all this out, since this was a good 5-minute walk that we just went on, I was like, that was the first thing I thought of, and that's why I named our meeting Matthew meeting Waystar.
Yeah,
Boyko.
I wish I could help you with that, Sean, but I have no idea what that is.
We really spun our tires for a while, but we got there. That's how I feel. We eventually hit or eventually landed. So yeah, this is Matthew Boyko with me. I'm Sean for anyone else who has seen the podcast before. Matthew is not just designer, our industrial designer.
That's right.
I had to look this up because I mentioned this before when we talked. Actually, when we met just the other week outside for the first time, I'd seen your face on a screen, but not in person until recently.
Yeah.
And you had one of our basically an internal presentation before the Trezor Safe 5 came out, or the TS5. I'm going to try to avoid acronyms while I talk. I'm really bad about that. If I say anything, you call me out on it. And if you say acronyms, I'll call you out.
I will do it.
We can go back and forth. But yeah, I know you worked on the Trezor Safe 5. That's a little teaser for some of you guys. Definitely that's some of the stuff we'll be covering today. But yeah, basically tell me what an industrial designer is. I looked it up because I want to try and take a guess before you tell me. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
this is my understanding. After I looked into it a little bit because I was like, what does this guy do? I saw your presentation, which was kind of like talking about the creation of the Trezor Safe 5.
Uh-huh.
And my understanding now is that an industrial designer is someone who sort of marries the practicality of something, how it actually works, its usability, and kind of the artistry or the art behind it, kind of melding or meshing these things together so that they work in harmony.
Yeah.
That's how I understand it, because it's like you don't, or I didn't really think about those questions or what it would take to marry those things before.
Yeah.
Like I want it to look this way, and then someone's like, it can't look that way because that messes with the practical parts of like, or the functional parts. Like it can't work if it looks like that. So you kind of have to do both of these things. Is that in the right territory?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is. I think historically, like the term form and function
Uh-huh.
are the two words that kind of bracket that discipline. But I think a more contemporary explanation for it might be we craft the experience for physical goods. So
Right.
anything that you can touch and hold
Mhm.
is something that industrial designers work on, and it could be anything from the mundane doorknob that you open your door with to
Mhm.
the automobile that you get in, to the shoes that you put on, to the toy that you throw your children. It's
Right.
really anything physical. It does, the scale of it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are things when I was thinking about it, it's like you interact with these things on a daily basis, but you don't, that doesn't cross your mind that
Yeah.
every single thing has
Yeah,
gone through a
literally
very,
every single thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's someone has put like a lot of thought into the thing that you're using.
Yeah.
Like, or yeah, you mentioned like a door, for example, like you can definitely tell when something feels more quality, feels more natural. Tell me if this is something that let's stick with doors for a minute, because that's, I think, an easy thing to grasp for anybody.
Okay. All right.
Definitely me. If I noticed this one day, it was pointed out to me on the internet and I can't unsee it now. Bad door design so a lot of doors swing one direction, right? And of course there's two-way doors, but in a one-way door, there are many, many doors that have handles on both sides.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make any sense because that implies you should pull on the door.
That's right.
And
yeah.
if it's one direction, then one
Yeah.
side doesn't pull. And
Yeah.
every time I see that now, and I run into one, I go, "Oh, bad door design."
Yeah.
And now I'm like, was there an industrial designer involved in
Yeah.
this situation?
Yeah, that's probably more of a spec solution, but yeah, so it's exactly that. It's a lot of times it's common sense things,
Mhm.
but a lot of times, the problems are much more complex than, opening a door, and
Right.
so there needs to really be a discipline to kind of look at that full experience of that product.
Mhm.
And it doesn't necessarily mean like making it better. It could just be providing a different experience, or the world that we live in is just full of all types of different people and different experiences and different environments and contexts. And so it just, requires a whole, a wide gamut of objects in the world to kind of fill those voids and fill those spaces. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about improving.
Yeah. And how did you find your way to Trezor? I know you said when we talked before that you've done this for a while. I know you've had other projects in the past. Well, what is it that I guess got you heading in this direction, or eventually did you just hear about us one day, or were you already
Yeah.
into crypto? Like, what's the story there?
Yeah. So actually in 2020, my son had to buy something overseas and they required Ethereum. And
Uh-huh.
so, we did some research on like how to get ETH
Yeah.
and all that. And, we ended up doing it and sending it overseas. And then I just went down a wormhole at that point. And that following summer, I read about 3 or 4 books on Bitcoin. And I had known about blockchain for quite a while from a prior job. But yeah, and so I just went down that rabbit hole and, just super interesting technology.
Mhm.
And was not really so much clued into the ideology behind it, which I think is pretty strong here at Trezor.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so that kind of brought me to the space, and then I just kept my eye open on Satoshi Labs, and it just happened to pop up.
That is
Yeah.
almost exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
Not well, just like keeping an eye out for stuff because I know I looked at this company for like a long time
Yeah.
before I ended up here. But Ethereum, that's really interesting because yeah, most people I would think typically start with Bitcoin
Hmm.
since that's I know Ethereum's like number two, but yeah, Bitcoin is usually where you hear people's like starting story.
Hmm.
But how long ago was that? Did you say like
It
when
was
all
in
this happened?
2020.
2020. Right, right.
Yeah.
The pandemic project. That's what it
That's
was.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
We were all at home together and, looking for things to do. And that was one of the things that we did
Mhm.
together, was try to figure out how to get crypto to somebody.
I
And we,
watched a lot of YouTube videos. That's what I did
yeah, well,
during the
we did
pandemic.
too. Yeah. Yeah, we did too.
But you read books even before you ever even started here.
I did. Yeah. I just wanted to find out like the validity and kind of the thought behind it. As I was saying, prior job, I used to work at Sony, and we were doing a project with an agency at the time, and they were showing us a project, blockchain project that they had done. This was many years ago, and they were trying to figure out for this client of theirs, like what to do with the blockchain. And so that's kind of how I found out about blockchain. It was super interesting technology. And then so I wanted to find out about, putting currency onto this blockchain and what that was. So
Mhm.
that's what a lot of the books kind of talked about, and talked about the reasons for it and who it was for, and some of the ideology, some of the tech, a little bit of everything. And I wish I could remember the books that I rented, but I would have to go back to my library list because it was,
Yeah, go find them somewhere.
4 years ago. So I can't really tell you right now what it was, but
Yeah, so blockchain, that's interesting because blockchain, like I'm aware that it's been around for longer than Bitcoin, but I
yeah,
guess I've always thought of it as being, I mean, maybe you could still say that it was like really popularized by Bitcoin. Maybe it existed.
absolutely. Yeah.
I was more familiar with like cryptography in general
Uh-huh.
existing. I know that goes back like a long way, at
Yeah.
least to the 70s. I don't know how far back, probably earlier.
Hmm.
But I don't even know. Do you know like what they were even doing with blockchain that long ago?
I don't
I don't.
know. I don't know.
I want to look into that now because it's like it took me long enough just to understand how it works with Bitcoin. That's something that I think this day and age it's not terribly difficult to grasp. It's just a new idea. Like when the
Yeah.
internet started, people were like, "Well, what am I going to use the internet for?" And that's like a laughable statement now.
Yeah.
It's like obviously
Exactly.
I saw an interview with it was Bill Gates and David Letterman, and Bill Gates is trying to like convince Letterman that this if anyone doesn't know, Letterman is like an old talk show host, but he's trying to be like, hey, this internet thing is like really cool. And David Letterman's like making fun of it and the
Yeah.
audience is laughing.
I think I've seen that clip before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
goes, what can I do on the internet I can't do somewhere else? And Bill Gates says, well, you can go on and watch like a baseball game. And then David Letterman says, does radio, the joke that he says in the clip, he goes, does radio ring a bell? And the whole audience laughs because it's like, oh, we could just use the radio. And it's like, now that seems silly, but it's just because people were unfamiliar with it.
Yeah.
And it feels like blockchain is in a very similar space, at least conceptually. That specific thing might not be as ground earth shattering as the internet, but like it's
Yeah.
at a place where people are like this kind of mysterious, vague thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's some of the things that we're battling as designers, and engineers, and everybody here at this company is trying to
Hmm.
get people to understand the flow of how you work with it,
Hmm.
with currency specifically for us. But it's a really abstract kind of concept that there's this ledger somewhere, and you own something on that ledger,
Yeah.
and you can access it anywhere. It's just
Hmm.
like it's completely like new way of thinking about how you access something, or even like ownership.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that still exists in a way.
Yeah. Once you, I don't know, kind of get it behind you, then suddenly things start clicking, I think,
Yeah.
a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, take us through a little bit of exactly what you do at Trezor, either on your broad concept or day to day. What is it, the things that you're working on or overarching goals that you head towards?
Yeah. So I was, I've been at Trezor for about a year at this point, and I was fairly lucky to kind of walk into a next generation product, because these guys, they started the whole category, and they launched this thing 10 years ago
Hmm.
and coming up on 11. And so really when I first got in here, it was about kind of refreshing that and kind of bringing what those guys had done before and kind of contemporizing it, for where we are today in design.
Hmm.
And so my day to day really is, well, it's kind of twofold. It's really working on our next generation of products right now, kind of
Hmm.
examining what we have right now and figuring out how to improve them. Um, ID is, there's kind of like these, I'll say, cycles of time in different design disciplines. So like I think of architecture as having maybe the longest cycle of time where it might take anywhere from, 2 to 20 years to get a building built or a tunnel or,
Yeah.
some major skyscraper. It takes a long time. And then kind of when we back down a little bit back into industrial design, our timeline can be anywhere from like a year to 4 years out. I've worked on stuff that it takes 5 years to get it out just
Hmm.
because of regulation and all the players that have to become involved in it. And then, like if you move down to another discipline, like, graphic design, it may maybe take a couple months or, a year at most really to get something put out into the world. And then, of course, these digital designers, they can get stuff out like that in a couple days.
Right.
So it's kind of funny how like the different design disciplines have these different kind of time brackets associated to them. So
Hmm.
to go back to your question, I'm kind of working stuff that's already kind of out, far in the future
Yeah.
in terms of like what we have out right now.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, because that was the thing. I know when you gave the presentation that you did, just to fill, I won't steal too much. I'll try not to steal your thunder here on all of your work, but basically, I hadn't considered too much like how these things came together. Like, there's always been a vague notion in my head of, okay, someone designs this thing, someone puts it together, and then in your presentation, I was like, oh, this dude's doing a lot of the legwork here because it was like the everything from like the color theory to the shape to how do we make this look like a progression of our previous products to like
Yeah.
how does it fit in with current
Yeah.
products. There's all these different questions that again it kind of goes back to that as a user myself, someone who's not doing the design part, like I'm not thinking of these things.
Yeah.
And then I know that when especially yeah you can get the TS or the Trezor Safe 5 in your hands today and it feels sleek, it looks good, it feels like premium.
Yeah.
And that's something that someone somewhere, in this case you, and actually I wanted to touch on that too. How many other people are you working with in this process? Like how
Yeah.
much of a piece of the pie is your responsibility, and what other are there other like teammates you're working with, or are there other industrial designers or other
Yeah.
subcategories or something?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing too, is that industrial design kind of can't live on its own. You have to
Mhm.
work with other people to get something out into the world.
Yeah.
So our current team right now, our close team, it's kind of hard to define like what the actual circle is because it
Hmm.
bleeds out into so many different areas. But our close team is about 4 people right now. Where I'm the industrial designer. We have a product developer who was our industrial designer before, who's kind of moved into a new role. We have a mechanical engineer, and then we have a
Hmm.
product manager who kind of oversees projects and making sure that they're running where they should be. But yeah, the team itself is we're like a really small, nimble team, and all I believe we're working at a really high level right now, which is really amazing.
Yeah.
But we also have a team of hardware engineers that we work with to design the board and like where the chips go and the ports and all that. We're working with them. And then we're also working with the marketing and branding team to make sure that we're on brand. And of course we work with the digital design team on the UI inside the product. So
Yeah.
industrial design is kind of like, it's kind of a conduit between all these different other disciplines, and it all kinds of, in a way, kind of runs through us. That's not to
Mhm.
say that it doesn't happen in other groups, but like, the hardware design team, the guys that are putting, designing the board and putting chips on the board and figuring all that circuit stuff out, they're not necessarily having conversations with the sales or the marketing or the branding.
Mhm.
So it's kind of distinct in that way that ID, has its hand in a lot of different things.
Mhm. Are there basic principles that you all have to follow or anything with like fundamental design? I think of like how complex these projects are and how much you must all need to be in sync and on the same page. Are there assumptions you can make about what the other people are doing? Or is like every project like a new thing with a new approach?
Yeah, I mean, every discipline kind of has its own wayfinding, to get
Hmm.
the most appropriate result. Um, Yeah, I think it's tough to say that there's like one design principle that everybody follows. It really is on a project by project basis, like trying to sync up with people and like what's
Uh,
appropriate and trying not to derail the other team's work, or throw a wrench into what they're doing.
yeah, that's one thing. Like kind of tied to that, I just was curious about this. Like, how much do you have to do about looking into your users' either wants or needs, basically just like user research? Um, how much does that play in when you've already got somewhat of an idea? Like you said, it's generational. This is like
Yeah.
a line in a series. How much do you look to our audience to be like, this is something that they need? And how does that play into how you choose what you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, the research team's gonna kill me right now because they are definitely
Yeah.
they're
Do they like
definitely part
report
of
to
the
you on this?
process.
Uh-huh.
Say again?
Like, do you take feedback from them and make decisions off that?
Yeah. It's really interesting, like having a digital channel. We have many of them. We're constantly getting feedback
Hmm.
on our products, and we definitely listen to what people have to say. People constantly, posting on Slack, oh, I saw this comment on Reddit, or
Yeah.
the research team might, say, hey, we finished some research with our users. Here's what they felt about the packaging, or, here's what they felt about the UI. And so that research team is really, aggregating all of this information and kind of dispersing it to the appropriate teams throughout. So we're doing
Hmm.
that constantly. And,
Yeah.
we're actually making changes. It's difficult in ID to make changes because there's hard assets involved, like there's steel that has to be cut to make
Yes.
molds and stuff. So it's hard to make changes really quickly.
You're actually using material in real
Yeah, yeah,
life
yeah.
for this stuff.
It's
Yeah.
and so it's a lot more costly, and there's just a
Mhm.
higher investment in hardware. That's why hardware is hard.
Yeah. That's
But
why they
yeah,
call it that.
yeah. So we're constantly integrating feedback from the users, and it's absolutely part of our process. Yeah.
Uh-huh. That's man, that would stress me out. Knowing that like my decisions like are going to be made into this thing. We're
It's
spending
really
the money to
great.
do it.
I
Yeah.
really love the feedback because, when you work so hard on something for a couple years and then you finally release it to the world,
Uh-huh.
like that's the most exciting time is you get this feedback of what people feel
Yeah.
like. It's like,
That would be gratifying
yeah, I mean,
if it all
it's
lands.
releasing something that came out of your brain into the
Uh-huh.
world. It's just incredible feeling
Like
to
an
have people
idea.
use it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it becomes a real thing.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
can hold it and interact with it, and you can actually, change people's lives with it. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
really amazing.
Which yeah, that's one of the things I love about working here is it really does feel like you're working on something meaningful.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I get to this is like a fun job, like being able to have these interviews and like put out content and stuff. But like, yeah, I don't even know what it's like. I've never worked on something. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a I'm not a
Yeah.
designer. So I'm not actually creating these things and making them come out. I guess this is a version of creation, less tangible for sure. Like
Yeah.
yours actually becomes like a real thing that exists in the world.
Yeah.
And
But
yeah,
it takes so many people to do it.
yeah.
So,
I definitely get it though. Like the getting that feedback, something I didn't realize plays such a big role in Trezor is we like so I'm in marketing and we get people from our support team constantly exactly what you said, like
yeah,
bringing in things from Reddit, from Twitter, from different sources all over the internet and things that they've
surveys and all
received.
kinds
Yeah.
of things. Yeah.
I always imagined just like when you get into larger companies, I guess we're like 200 people. Is that mid-size at that point? When does it stop being? We say we're a startup, which is true. We are a
Yeah, it is
startup,
a startup for
but it's
sure.
like, at what point are you a mid-sized company? Is there
Yeah,
a number?
I think it's bigger than where we're at right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're
We can
still
still
very
get away.
small. It's a very intimate situation.
Okay,
Like when
yeah.
you can walk up to somebody's desk and
I love that. It's
being
like,
able to get information back and forth between somebody.
because you can, and yeah, walking around and interacting with people who have so much influence on things. Like I know that when I looked at our website for the first time, I was like, man, it was around the time we did like a brand redesign, like
Uh-huh.
using the color schemes that we do and keeping everything a little more consistent. And I was like, I really love how like sharp and snappy all of this looks.
Yeah.
And now I sit next to that guy,
Yeah.
the guy who makes
exactly,
it. Like
exactly.
we like
Yeah,
chat
yeah.
every single day.
Yeah, but to kind of go to lead, follow into your question, the teams get larger as you
Mhm.
grow. And, in a prior job, I used to work at Sony, and the teams are just massive. And in some ways it's a luxury. In some ways it's a hindrance because when you
Uh-huh.
work, when you have kind of the capacity and the facilities to do something much larger, well then, you can explore more.
Yeah.
And for a designer, that's like the fun part, is
Right.
exploring like what's possible. But at the same time, you kind of lose. Sometimes you lose authorship because there's just so many levels cut into it.
Hmm.
So I just love working here. I think it's great. It's a fantastic size right now. I can't.
Yeah.
And we're producing, the quality of work and the quality of product that we're producing is just incredible for the
Mhm.
team size that we have. It's just really
Okay.
great.
Yeah, I didn't know if I was the only person who felt that way. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
it feels like it's pretty impactful for the number of people that we have.
yeah,
I mean, not to toot our own horns, I guess, but like
yeah,
it is like it's a cool thing. Like it's a lot of fun, and seeing that ratio
yeah,
is pretty neat.
yeah,
I
yeah.
would say.
I think we just have some really experienced people. Like our mechanical engineer has some history in the aerospace industry, so it's like,
Mhm.
super high tech, bleeding edge technology that he's kind of familiar with, and he's bringing all of that all of that knowledge from aerospace into this little product,
Yeah.
And our prior industrial designer, he's been practicing for a very long time and has gotten a lot of products out into the world. And part of becoming a better designer is really about producing work and learning from your mistakes. And over time, you just get better and better. So I think we just have an amazing team right now.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned was like, well, just going back to that, like taking feedback from people and then kind of making a small change and doing that over and over. That was a question I wanted to touch on, which was like just the iterative process of everything. Um, iterative. Me, I want to take a moment because it took me so long to grasp iterative for some reason. It's such a basic concept, but it's not unless you're like a programmer or something. The
Yeah,
word doesn't come up very often.
it doesn't know.
But it's basically, I think in math, it's like when you just add like +1 to something, you iterate and it goes
Yeah, I
up
could
and up.
see
That's what,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's like, but
yeah,
like basically taking something and making a small change or an addition
yeah,
each time. And that is basically what you're doing, right? Like you're having to make a little change each time. Like, what does that process look like? Especially when this eventually has to be a real world thing. Like,
yeah,
how are you making these small changes over time while not committing too much to the real world as
yeah.
well?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of feeds back into your prior question about like the kind of the things that we share between design disciplines.
Hmm.
And if there was one, I would have to say it would be design process. That's kind of a shared process between most design disciplines, where you're kind of iterating and coming up with concepts. You're developing the idea, then you kind of put it out there and prototype it, and you test it, and then that cycle continues
Hmm.
until at some point either you either you run out of time, money, or you
Yeah.
realize, hey, this is great where we're at right now. Let's try to release this.
Like time to pull the trigger.
Yeah, and so like that happens. It happens kind of in different ways between disciplines, but what we're doing right now, yeah, we've just released the Trezor Safe 5, and we feel like it's a really great product. There are some slight changes that we're probably going to start to work on in the future, because there's also another issue which people don't realize is there are these kind of scales of economy when you work on hardware,
Hmm.
that you kind of have access to other technologies when the quantities become more, or potentially like the longer you've been in, with a particular vendor, they bring on new technologies, and
Hmm.
maybe the prices change over time, and
Yeah.
so you can kind of roll in some of these things for next generation. So it's a lot of that too, like
Hmm.
where a vendor will come back and say, "Hey, we've got this new, I don't know, s- dome switch that you can integrate into your next product," or, "Hey, there's this new screen technology we just saw last week,"
Yeah.
or they bring things to us as well, and then likewise we bring things to them too that we thinking about. Hey, can we do this? Can we make this line a little bit shorter on the screen? Or
Yeah.
it's a kind of a back and forth.
Yeah. I think if you don't do it or you're not involved in that process, it's just something you don't realize it goes into everything. Like
Yeah.
that definitely was clear when I started here because it wasn't something I'd ever considered. It's just like the product, you order the product and it arrives.
Yeah.
But like during the ramp up to the Trezor Safe 5, to me it seemed like quite smooth. It was like I remember the first time we're sitting
That's
in
good. I'm
there.
glad it seemed that way.
Yeah. There was this conversation about like Trezor's very open with the way that they
Yeah.
communicate with everyone, which is another thing I love about the company is just like the transparency. We use that word all the time because it's true. Like it's a
Yeah,
very
it is.
transparent company. They're very open about stuff. And the first time I heard people at our C level, is that what does C level stand for? I'm just
All the C's.
it's
CEO,
executive. Yeah, okay,
CTO.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what people say C-level. I was like, that's not
Yeah.
like that doesn't stand for a word, does it? But yeah, okay, CFO. Yeah, that all makes sense. So basically, our C-level is like talking to the entire company, and they're like, hey, like we're good on glass, we're good on plastics, the semiconductors and the microchips are all like set to come together. And I was like, man,
It's a lot of moving
that's just
pieces.
it's all happening, and I'm sitting at home
Yeah.
going, "Where's my Trezor 5?" Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
I was
yeah.
some. I mean, not I haven't been that way about Trezor, but definitely about like products in the past, like growing up
Yeah.
and being like a whiny. I mean, not to say you guys are whiny consumers. No, I'm just saying I have been that at some point. Like, why is this stuff delayed? Like, it's a complex process. There's
So
a lot that
complex.
goes on
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean that's why you don't see a lot of people doing hardware.
Mhm.
It's just it requires so many different types of disciplines to contribute to releasing something.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, look at us right now. I mean, we have a whole guys can't see it, but there's a whole team of people back here, like
Mhm.
filming this stuff for us and doing the sound and the amount of work that goes and effort that goes into producing a piece of hardware and shipping it to your door is just
Yeah.
staggering.
Yeah. I think it's just maybe because it's just such an expectation these days is like you
Yeah,
can click a button and the
I
thing
know.
shows up.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
all of that. There's an enormous amount of people in the world, millions and millions, all working to make this
yeah,
stuff happen,
yeah.
so that we can have these conveniences and this level of quality of life, basically.
Hmm.
Just a lot going on. And I mean, I guess another question I had regarding this is like, where does this all start then? If we're doing this iterative process, like you've already mentioned, this is an existing product, which I'm sure helps, but you're still starting from zero on a new thing. There's like a new thing coming in, and so how are you thinking of like how much does previous design play into it versus like what you have to do now? Like, what is the starting point for something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that stuff happens when you start to get to a certain size in a company.
Hmm.
Being a startup, you don't really have a lot of resources available to you.
Hmm.
You don't have a lot of team players that are just kind of sitting around looking for something to do. Everyone is like really working their butts off.
Yeah.
And so to do some R&D, which is what we call it, R&D, for like what's next or what's in the future, it requires like a lot of time and
Wait, R&D.
consideration. R&D, research and development.
Research and development. There we
Yeah,
go. That was the
yeah,
call out right there. So
yeah. And so, like the big corporations, like Google and the Apples of the world and the Samsungs, they've got not only do they have like billions of dollars to throw into R&D,
yeah,
but they also have teams of engineers and designers and researchers and anthropologists and like all kinds of disciplines to throw into that effort.
yeah,
And as a startup, we just don't have a lot of that.
hmm,
So, part of my goals here at the company is to get us to start to do a lot more R&D for the future.
hmm,
And I know we have some R&D initiatives going on right now. Obviously, I can't really talk about that stuff, but yeah, absolutely, that's part of it. Because as I was saying earlier about the cycle times for releasing product, you've got a couple years, and you want to be constantly refreshing your products, but you also want to be staying in the lead
yeah,
and
yeah,
introducing people to new things, and add value to what people need, and add
right.
value to people's lives, and so that's also on the burner for industrial design and everyone really here, is to figure out what's next.
Uh huh. And so
Yeah.
with something like a Trezor device, or since we've most recently spent a lot of time on the Trezor Safe 5. What is like? How do you balance like security with the usability, with the aesthetics or the artistry? How does that work for this product specifically? Like, if you're starting from the beginning, like we said, like how are you unifying those three things,
Yeah.
or how did you specifically with the TS5?
Yeah, the TS5 it's an interesting product. The body is actually ultrasonically welded together, so you can't really break it
Uh,
apart. It's kind of melted together.
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah,
I know what welding is. And I know what sonic
it's
things
actually a
are.
really cool process where you put the lower shell of the product and it goes into this machine, and you put the top piece onto there, and then this machine kind of comes down, and it sends these electrical pulses through the plastic and kind of melts
Pulses.
it. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
where it connects, and it kind of melts it together. And so it's things like that that really
Uh-huh.
support our security for the device. We also have now secure elements. That's much more of a hardware engineer, hardware
Yeah.
designer job.
So I was going to say that's kind of like two different forms of security, like the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
physical casing,
Yeah,
and
and
then the
then
interior as well.
there's kind of low level things too, like using glue in particular places. So,
Yeah.
if someone,
Glue. The
you'd
most
be
secure
surprised,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, always used to laugh at tape, actually, is the one that I used to laugh at. But
Uh-huh.
you would be surprised at how many things are put together with tape. Yeah, I mean, there
Is
are
this like a
windows.
special? Is this like ultrasonic welded tape, or
No, but it's a really, highly engineered tape. And,
uh-huh.
people don't realize this, but there's actually windows. A lot of windows are actually taped onto buildings, surprisingly. And so
Like the ones that look like they're just a part of the
just
building, like
glass.
those things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are like extremely highly engineered glues and tapes that a lot of these consumer electronics companies use.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you watch like a break it down video or something of like an iPhone or some
Uh-huh.
other high level phone, you'll see some of this adhesive in there. Um, yeah, so those are some of the things that we do. Something as simple as like if someone tries to pry the glass screen off, like are they able to do it? Does it
Yeah.
crack?
Which I've noticed that, like when you hold that thing in your hand, it's like it's on there.
Yeah,
Because I thought about that,
exactly.
I was like, can you get anything in these like
Yeah,
little I wouldn't guess you wouldn't call them cracks, maybe seams, kind
yeah,
of along the side. They are like completely solid. Like,
yeah,
I don't even know how that would work.
yeah. And sometimes there's a lot of security that happens on the software engineering and the firmware engineering side.
Hmm.
And, thankfully I can kind of wipe my hands and say, great, I don't have to worry about this aspect of it. And
Yeah.
those guys have kind of taken care of it. So there are limitations to kind of what an industrial designer can do.
Hmm.
But we generally have a lot of conversations about like, okay, is this going to be enough? Like, what else can we get in there? And that
Yeah.
also translates down for the industrial designer. It translates down back to the packaging solutions because that's something else that we work on.
I was going to ask you about that because you also do packaging, right?
Yeah, yeah, and the packaging.
That's also even more mind blowing to me that there's like you're working on the actual thing, but
Yeah,
then you have to think about packaging too. It
yeah.
seems like a simple thing conceptually, but then it's like actually that's a lot of work.
Yeah, packaging is really, I mean, I casually talk about like these things, but it's actually a completely different design discipline is packaging design and,
Hmm.
um, consumer electronic design. There's all kinds of different pockets of industrial design. And just again, to kind of go back to the size of our team, we don't have the resources to have like a dedicated packaging design team. So that's kind of why we take that on. And I really love our packaging right now. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Where, one of the goals for the packaging is really to get it to be 100% biodegradable package.
Hmm.
That's kind of, where the industry is heading right
I
now.
thought of that too. That was something that stood out the first time I got
Yeah,
a Trezor device.
it's really difficult to do that. Probably the hardest part for us right now, we have a wrap that goes around the outside of the package that really indicates whether the package has been tampered with or not,
Hmm.
right? Because you can see that there's this clear wrap around it, and if it's been destroyed or it looks kind of funky, then maybe I should call Trezor and find
Hmm.
out if this is the right way, if this is what it should look like.
Yeah, there's that. The things I didn't think about because if you're looking at it on a table, you might just think this is just a normal package. But yeah, there's the clear wrap on the outside. There's the security strip.
That's right, tear off.
Yeah, which that's very obvious if it's been tampered with. There's the fact that the outside of the packaging sticks to there's like a lid with the base.
Yep,
But
we
the
call it
wrap,
the cap.
yeah, yeah. And then the paper around that is also attached to those. And then the actual device itself has the security sticker over the USB port.
Yeah.
So it's like layers of security
Absolutely,
all
yeah.
the way down.
So those are like some of the conversations that we have with the
Hmm.
team. Like, is this enough for us? Is this enough for our consumer to kind of have confidence that the product has not been tampered with? So a
Hmm.
lot of those things, like the holographic sticker that goes over the USB port, like
Yeah.
I don't design that sticker. That's handled by another designer at on the design side.
Uh-huh.
But again, we have to kind of integrate all these kind of disciplines to make the product secure, and those are conversations that we're having.
Yeah. And so I guess I'll walk back what I said at the beginning about I never notice these things. I did notice it with Trezor devices. I was like, this is really smart because like
Yeah,
I kind of had in my head like, well, how do I know if I'm getting this from? I ordered mine directly from the website, which is what we recommend. We say
yeah,
get
I
it
did too.
directly through us.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. My first Trezor device was in 2018. That was when I ordered it. I've only been here for about a year, for anyone who doesn't know. But like I said, I kept my eye on the positions for literally
Yeah.
years. I looked for things.
Hmm.
But yeah, nothing really opened up that I fit for until now. But yeah, my first Trezor device was 2018. And that whole process, we've refined it since then. I noticed differences
Yeah.
today versus I bought the Model T. That was
Yeah.
my first
Different
one.
package.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like things that I'd never actually thought of before.
Yeah.
But then I was suddenly very aware of it whenever it came because I had those questions. I was like, well, how do I know if someone hasn't like done anything to it?
Yeah.
And it's been accounted for, which
Yeah.
is like really cool and really
Yeah,
neat.
actually, that package, now that you bring it up, the package right now, it's kind of good example of something that we're kind of working on right now, where currently we use a paper pulp
Hmm.
process for that package, that tray that that you lift the Trezor Safe, both of them actually, the Trezor Safe 3 and the Trezor Safe 5, you
Yeah.
pull it out of this paper pulp. It's like a slurry
Hmm.
that, gets kind of injected onto this screen, and the water is extracted through that screen, and that's how that paper pulp tray is created. And we just recently kind of investigating a new technology to create that tray, which has a smaller carbon footprint. And so I'm hopeful that we can get through that, because again, that's like a constant battle, is like trying to improve the product and kind of, again, bring down our carbon footprint for the package specifically. For the device, it's a much harder ask to do that because of some
Yeah.
of the security issues that we do have to deal
Uh-huh.
with.
Yeah, that's the balance. Like we were
Yeah.
talking about, these are the things you have to consider whenever creating this design and stuff.
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm an industrial designer. Now, just the since we've been talking,
Don't get
that's
too confident, Sean.
I think I'll probably stick with this. I don't know if that's how many years how long did you have to spend learning? How much did you get from your formal studies versus your actual you said you've been doing this about 20 years? Was
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
How much would you say you would contribute to the jobs you've worked versus formal education?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you come out of
That one's not
school,
even on the laptop. I'm just asking that.
I think when you come out of school, you've got a lot of energy and you got a lot of hopes and dreams. And then
Mhm.
I think when you come out in industry and you realize that there are all these systems in place that you kind of have to work around and navigate, it's a really eye-opening experience.
Mhm.
So, I think the longer that you're out there, the more you know of what you can do, what you can't do, and you become, I think, a little bit more efficient in the way you approach work,
Mhm.
because there are certain things that that are feasible in terms of like time and cost, and just even being able to use a particular process. There are some processes on like mobile phones that we can't even touch because we don't have the quantities available
Mhm.
to touch that particular technology. So you don't really learn about that stuff in school. You learn that on the job.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I wanted to ask about in regards to that is like, if it kind of relates to like you come out of school with all these assumptions, and then even then, a lot of that you can't really predict like the jobs that you're going to have. I'm sure you've
Yeah.
worked on a variety of things.
So many things.
Yeah. So one question I had is like, with Trezor being this far into your career, in what ways has that differed from things you've done in the past? And were there new things you had to think of or figure out with this device or with our processes versus previous jobs or projects?
Yeah, kind of just to go back to the process, that kind of cyclical wheel that I was talking about earlier, about design and prototype and test and go back. That kind of stays with you no matter what you work on.
Mhm.
I've actually done a lot of packaging before for pharmaceutical industry, and that same kind of thing happens. I've also done a lot of work, my prior job at Sony. So I have these kind of tools in place that I've used before that translate to a different type of project. In particular for Trezor, I think a lot of what I'm doing now relates back to some of the early stuff that I did at Sony, where I just learned so much about electronics. And in a prior job, actually, I did some work for Dell, and I learned a lot about that in regards to, I guess, the compactness of PCBs. People don't really realize like how finite and how small everything on a computer board is. Where they put the chips and where the ports go.
Mhm.
And yeah, so the work at Dell that I was doing, there was one point on a particular project that I was working on that I wanted to move the USB port just literally a millimeter,
Mhm.
and what that did for the rest of the components on the board, we couldn't move it. So I think that
Like it just would have messed everything else up.
Oh
like
yeah, I
moving it out
mean,
of the
you know,
way.
it would have just set us back like months. They would have had to redirect circuits
Yeah,
and replace chips because of this 1 millimeter movement of a
right.
USB. So I don't think that people realize, you know, when you get to the level of product that we're working on, like
Mhm.
it's just it's at such a high level that every quarter of a millimeter matters.
Yeah, there's just no room to mess
Yeah,
with anything else.
that involves like the thickness that which people are probably more aware of, like how thick something is.
Yeah.
But what's going on inside of that case is just, you know, it's staggering.
Yeah. That's I always thought about that with like smartphone development because
Yeah.
people would be like, it's 0.03
Yeah.
millimeters thinner. And the a lot of people like the public will react like, okay, come on. But I'm like,
Yeah.
actually,
It's like an eyelash.
that's a
It's like an
lot.
eyelash hair
Yeah.
thickness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like to do that on the engineering, the like the construction level is like crazy with the amount that fits
Yeah.
into an iPhone, like how much power is in there. Like
Yeah.
a very pretty, I don't know, I feel like a common comparison these days is like the power in your iPhone was like the whole room of electronics in like the early 2000s,
Yeah.
like
I
something
could
like
totally
that.
see that for
Yeah.
sure.
The amount of like,
Come a long way.
yeah, the amount that they've condensed everything is just crazy. Um, but that kind of with that illustration about moving the USB port, like one question that I had is what are some of the things that people overlook whenever like if I'm just a user for most things, I'm like a dummy. I have no idea what it took to make something. Are there like common assumptions or just things that people are unaware of like how much effort or how much work it takes when creating a product?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think that it really doesn't matter. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are some things that are much easier to put out in the world than others. You know,
Hmm.
certainly like what we're producing is difficult because there's a whole software component behind it. You know, some of the things that, you know, exist in the world, like, you know, as a hinge or like a light switch or something, there's just not that complexity involved in it, or like a pen or something. Um, but I think what people don't really realize is that like literally designers touch everything that's in your world. And it's kind of staggering to like look around your house right now as you're listening to this, or look in the car that you're driving and imagine that like, you know, if you're in a car right now listening to this, you know, there's probably a designer that only works on, you know, the tail lights for cars.
Yeah.
There's only a designer that works on the wheels for cars, you know,
A whole
like,
person dedicated to that
yeah,
thing.
or maybe even a whole team, you
Yeah.
know? And, you know, the same kind of thing applies in your house too, you know? There are textiles designers that work on the carpets that are in your house and the
Mhm.
towels, and, you know, there's graphic designers that work on the clock maybe that you have on the wall. It's just it's crazy to think that everything in your world is touched by a designer's hand. Most
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any I kind of have an adjacent question, which is like, are there any designs that you personally think are either underrated or underappreciated in the world? Maybe people kind of take for granted where you're like, no
Yeah.
one realizes how cool this is.
Yeah, I mean, I totally geek out on things, you know. I love mundane objects that we live
Hmm.
with that we just don't really recognize. And you know, things like a crate. I think
Hmm.
there are beautiful crates and there are not so beautiful crates. And, you know,
This is like
when
a passion of yours, like
not
great
necessarily
quality.
crates, but I guess my point is like the mundane things in our
Yeah.
world. You know, I worked on a light switch one time,
Hmm.
and that's like a really mundane object that
Yeah.
I just love because everyone has them and you have to deal with them every day.
Hmm.
And if you've ever encountered a light switch that is crappy, man, it can ruin your day. It is just
Yeah.
like,
I
why
hate
did
this
they
thing.
design it this way?
Yeah.
I just want my lights on and
Yeah.
dim, you know?
Yeah. That's true. There's certain I feel like everyone has to, even maybe even if you don't realize it, there is some mundane object that you
Yeah.
either love or appreciate, or maybe you just don't realize what it would be like to not have that thing.
Yeah.
I know mine right off the top of my head because as soon as you said that, I thought like, well, what's my thing that I like that?
Well, now I'm curious. What is it?
I know exactly what it is. It is toothbrushes.
Ah,
There is a
yes.
design. So real quick side note. So you kind of go back and forth between our location. I don't think I mentioned it specifically, but we're in the Czech Republic,
Yep.
specifically in Prague, out of our headquarters. But you go back and forth occasionally, or maybe it's a little lopsided because you said more in the summer. Back to San Francisco is where
Yes,
you
that's
live,
right. Yeah.
or I can just say America if we don't want your actual city. But yeah, you go back and forth between here in America. And what I never had in America is the toothbrush that I have now because it's a Czech design. That's
Nice.
why it's relevant here.
Uh-huh.
Instead of being completely straight, I'm illustrating with my hands for anyone who's listening. There is a visual version of this podcast in case you want to watch it, but on camera you can see my beautiful face and hand. Uh, Instead of the straight toothbrush, there's a slight curve at the top
Uh-huh.
that bends it a little bit more towards your
Yeah.
teeth and makes it so that you don't have to apply as much pressure or effort while you brush your teeth.
Yeah.
And at first it felt really weird because my brain was acclimated to the traditional toothbrush.
Mhm.
And then I got this one with a slight curve at the top. And I was like, I never want to go back from this.
Yeah.
After like 2 weeks of using it.
That's like a classic industrial design project. That's
Yeah.
that's like a project that you would get as a student, and because it involves so many different factors,
Uh-huh.
the ergonomics of the handle.
It changed my life. I
Yeah,
was
no,
like,
that's
I gotta
great.
have
I'm,
this
I'm
thing now.
happy for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there are a lot of things like that. Exactly. Yeah, that just like slight tweaks can really make a difference in your life.
Mhm.
It's hard, like off the top of my head, to think about something that is like that in my world. So I wish I had thought about the toothbrush.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. That kind of relates to. I wanted to actually go back to what I teased in the beginning, which was like the color design of the Trezor Safe 5 series,
Yeah.
because it just made me think of that again, which is like these intentional choices that
Yeah.
you make with things and kind of having them land naturally with people and feel good whenever you see or feel or hold them or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because that was the thing you mentioned in your or the thing that stood out the most. I know there was more, but the thing that I think landed the most for me in your presentation was the intentional color choice, which is we have 4 colors. I'm going to say them all. Green barrel, that's one. Bitcoin orange, that's the very obvious one. Green barrel, like the
It's like our Trezor green.
yeah, it's like very similar to that. Barrel, I was trying to think of the category. It's like a stone, a type
It's a
of stone.
mineral.
Yeah, mineral.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
they're minerals, Marie. That's what the guy
Yeah.
says in Breaking Bad. There is violet ore,
Violet
another
orb,
mineral.
yes.
We got 2 and
Yeah.
black graphite.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of on a mineral kick for this
Yeah.
one.
I think the idea was to kind of keep it in the vein of mining.
The vein, nice. I like what you did there. In the vein of mining, it's very well put together.
Yeah, because of course we all know Bitcoin is mined.
Oh my God, the
So,
layers, it just keeps going deeper and deeper. Okay, but the colors, well, I totally got off track there because I was enamored by that for a moment. But the colors, you said were all very intentional. And actually, yeah, you go ahead and explain it because I don't want to do
Yeah,
like a
so
bad version of it.
that was actually one of the first tasks when I got here, was to kind of come up with some CMF for our Trezor Safe 5.
What is CMF?
CMF is color, material, and finish.
Aha, okay.
And that's actually another discipline for design as well. Like there are teams of people that just do CMF.
So you've got your hands in kind of a bunch of these different
I
aspects
do,
of
yeah,
things.
yeah. It's because of the size of our team.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, yeah, that was one of my first tasks when I came to Trezor, was to figure that out. And one of the first things that I noticed about that was, our brand color is green, which is a very strong color. Probably the most famous brand that's green is Starbucks. So
Yeah, you're right.
yeah, so so we had Trezor green kind of established. We're not going to change that. It's a very great color for us. We kind of own that color right now in the space. And Bitcoin orange, we're not going to change that,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of an industry standard.
It's a
And
classic.
one of the things that I noticed when I saw those 2 colors was that it's actually part of the color wheel. So
Mhm.
there's a color wheel that's based on color theory, and it goes back a couple hundred years. And there are primary colors, which are red, blue, and yellow. And if you mix those primary colors, like if you mix red and yellow, you get orange. And
Mhm.
if you mix red and blue, you get purple, and so on. And so there's a secondary color palette, which is made up by mixing those, which is green, Bitcoin orange, and our violet. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. That's great. So I kind of explored that a little bit. And yeah, that's kind of how those colors came about. And then the black is really just kind of a staple in consumer electronics, if you will.
Yeah,
it's,
can't go wrong with black.
you can't go wrong with black. I mean, the thing about black is that it's kind of a neutral color. it's one of those colors that really doesn't carry a lot of personality,
Mhm.
or I shouldn't say that. It has a
Which is, for
personality.
anyone not watching, entirely what we're dressed in right now.
Yeah.
All black on both
Yeah.
our outfits.
Yeah. Black is kind of one of those colors that, you can perhaps attach another personality to it.
Mm,
If I add like, a pink line to a black element, it changes the character of it
uh-huh.
entirely.
That's true.
Whereas like, it might be harder to attach a new personality to the orange.
Yeah.
It's a little bit harder to kind of mix other colors with that color. So black is kind of like this default kind of neutral color
Mhm.
for us. And the other two colors carry a lot of the personality.
Yeah, I remember something you said that really illustrated that well, which was like you walk into a room and it's all orange. Like that really has an impact on your impression of the
Absolutely.
thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were to
Or if someone's
associate,
dressed all in orange.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Attaching that to something is like you would, I don't know, just intuitively, I didn't consider that.
Yeah, I mean, color has there's a lot of psychology behind color.
Uh-huh.
The great example that I give people is, when you go into a hospital, a lot of that
Hmm.
garb that people that interact with you, it's generally like a mint or a light blue, and it's
Hmm.
because there's a psychology of color that kind of is soothing and calming to you. You wouldn't want to walk into a hospital and have people wearing bright orange or like red or
Right.
something. So, there's a lot of that happening with color. I won't say that I'm like the color expert
Hmm.
because I am an industrial designer, but I try to actually bring some kind of meaning to the product that, to the solutions that I provide.
So the color wheel we have, so green, purple, and orange. Those are the associated colors. So I just have to say this, that has to be what they were doing on Barney on the TV show. That's like
Yeah.
Barney the dinosaur is
Barney
purple.
was purple.
He has a
That's
big
right.
green belly.
That's why we call our product Violet, Sean.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's also Baby Bop, his sidekick,
Yes.
who's green. And
Yes.
I'm not 100% positive here. I'm like 85% sure there's a third orange dinosaur, like a tertiary
It's
one.
been a long time since I've watched Barney, Sean.
And
I wish I could help you with that.
I mean, I don't think it's so bad to be associated with Barney. I love that show when I was a kid. That was the first thing I thought. Well, not the first thing, but I realized that as you were saying things, it was
Yeah.
like, those are all the same colors.
Yeah.
And I guess yeah, you're right. They just work well together.
Yeah.
I certainly associate them myself.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about color is the further you can really dive deep into it. I mean, if you want to go explore color, there's like thousands of books written on it,
Uh-huh.
and different ways to approach color. And one of the exercises that I did was really try to figure out relationships of color.
Hmm.
And there are certain, tetrads and analogous colors and complementary colors, and there are all these theories behind color and how they work together. And that was some of
Yeah.
the things that we explored. And the particular type of violet and the particular type or hue of green that we've chosen
Hmm.
is very intentional.
I love it. It's like
Yeah, it's a super dark,
Yeah.
super rich.
kind of like that forest green sort of thing, or sage. I don't know what adjective goes before it,
Yeah,
but I
I
know I
mean,
like that one.
Yeah, yeah. So, like it's not like I just went and said, "Hey, let's use this, purple and green."
Yeah. I
Like
choose purple.
yeah, it's,
Yeah.
if it's about being very specific about the type of violet or the specific green that we want.
Uh-huh.
And it's really not easy to get that stuff done because you have to rely on a process outside of your control. So, we probably had like, I don't know, 15 different violets that
Mhm.
we explored trying to get the right one for that product. There were some that were too dark or too
Yep.
saturated or too black. And it takes a long time to do that. So,
I saw one of them. It was a brighter version, I think.
Yeah.
And it does like hit differently.
yeah. And the thing is, you get those color chips back, and then, you go back and you look at like what the brand team is doing, or you look at what the digital team is doing, with what's happening on our website. And you try to decide like, okay, well, how is this going to fit into what those other teams are doing? And like,
Mhm.
what's appropriate for us?
Yeah.
So it actually requires quite a bit of thought.
Right. Yeah, it's another. I mean, I can tell you the first time we got our like finalized prototype, my boss's boss had one, and she kind of came and showed it to us, and it had that moment of people being like, "Ooh, yeah, like this looks good," like
Yeah.
which I assume is what you're going for.
I
Like
love
you,
it. Yeah.
yeah,
I think it's
that's what
beautiful.
how you want your people to feel.
Yeah.
Which it did. That's the exact impression that I had, and or people around me as well.
Well, you touch on something that maybe a lot of people don't really talk about, but part of the job of an industrial designer is actually to create desire.
Hmm.
And that's kind of a double-edged sword because, you want people to hold on to things for a long time so you're not like constantly throwing out products into the ground.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, you're tasked with trying to make something desirable and, making people want it. So again, that's kind of like an unwritten, task for any designer really is to make
Hmm.
something desirable to maybe a particular type of person or maybe to target it to a certain type of people and figuring out like kind of what that group of people are interested in or what they relate to or what they, what is going to attract them.
Yeah.
A lot of that kind of research that goes behind the scenes on that is part of the industrial designer job as well.
Yeah, you can definitely see and feel that as a consumer whenever there's certain products that just jump out to you so much more
Yeah,
and create that. It's almost like, I don't know if it's a lust per se, but it's like you feel
sure,
it like, yeah, I want
sure.
this thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that kind of, I was wondering what sort of like other channels, since we're kind of talking about the colors and in that whole process of stringing everything together, like what were some of the challenges that you had on the Trezor Safe 5? Maybe things that differed from the past products, or was there anything specific to this line versus the others that made this one more difficult?
Yeah, I think there was a challenge a little bit on the metal plate that's on the back.
Hmm.
I think we have that metal plate on there.
Yeah,
It's
that's like the
kind of
brushed
yeah, it's a
plate. That's
brush
what.
plate that's on
Uh
the
huh.
back.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a signal for us in terms of security. And, when you think of like a brushed metal, you might think of like a lock or,
Hmm.
something that's kind of strong. And
Yeah.
so we kind of use that material as a symbol for strength and security.
Yeah.
But to create that little piece is really difficult. Difficult. Actually, that process is done by one company in Germany. And
Like ours specifically.
our plate,
Uh
yeah.
huh. Yeah.
And there's really only one company that we know of that can do that type of material and finish. It's actually a really difficult process where they have to run a brush over a plate of aluminum.
So it is literally a brush that's
It
doing
is, yeah.
this.
It's actually a wheel that goes over this plate, and there's a mask on there to keep that glossy logo of ours on the back.
Yeah.
And then they brush the rest of the plate, and then after they do that, they take that little plate and then it's actually a big plate. There's like 50 of them on a sheet. And then
Hmm.
they take it into a bath and they wash the mask off so that all of the surface is clean. And then it goes into a laser cutter and it cuts out all those plates to be the right size. And that process is really difficult. And like I said, there's only one person that we know about that does it in Germany. And to get the color and to get that particular brush it takes a lot of time. And it's a lot of back and forth and saying, wow, this grain is not right, or this beginning of the sheet has a different grain of brush than the end of the sheet does. And what can we do to fix that?
Yeah.
And then from batch to batch to get that violet to be the same, like sheet 1 looks different than sheet 50. Like, it's a lot of that kind of going to the factory and making sure that everything's in line. And, there's guys upstairs that are doing that.
Uh huh. It's so funny, like hearing or just thinking of the contrast between everything it takes to make this thing what it is,
Yeah.
also that it can land it. I know when I get it, like it just feels so basic. I just go, yeah, this is
Yeah.
cool. Like, that's-
Well,
I
you
have
just
some-
dive into the UI is what you do. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it's so interesting hearing about that stuff because, like, I've always had like I don't know. I always wondered about it, but I was like, when am I ever going to sit across from someone and get to ask them these questions? I was like, oh, that'll never happen. Here we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
So it's like it's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
interesting to hear. I'll ask you a few questions just to wrap up here. I don't even know how long we've been talking at this point, but yeah, tons of good information. Thank you very much. Any advice for younger designers or anyone who wants to get into consumer electronics, either someone who's in school or maybe earlier in the career,
Yeah.
just kind of getting started out?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of kind of tailoring the work that you're doing right now into where you want to be. It's kind of
Mhm.
imagining, you have that dream job and create some work and create some projects that can get you that job.
So
Um,
setting your sights on that
yeah,
thing and moving in
absolutely.
that direction.
That's actually one of the reasons why I went back to get my master's degree actually in design. Because when I
Hmm.
when I when I first left design school, I ended up doing furniture for a long time.
Hmm.
And it just really wasn't what I wanted to do ultimately when I was doing it, and realized I would rather be doing consumer electronics. And So that's one of the reasons why I went back to school, to really focus my portfolio of work back towards that area.
Mhm.
But if you're not in school and you kind of have a day job, take that time at night or the weekends and, start producing some work for your portfolio to try to get yourself noticed out there.
Uh-huh. I was gonna ask, like, is this something you need to have a degree for? Need to go to school? Is it something you can do without it? Is that even a possibility?
Today, I think you could probably do it without a degree. There's
Uh-huh.
just so many resources online. I don't necessarily recommend that. I think
Take some discipline, I would say.
it takes a lot of
Yeah.
discipline. Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of going to school for something, is that you're entirely focused on that one task. 120 hours a week, you're focused on getting that work done.
120? Is that what you
Well,
said?
40 hours of work, in a work week, right? You got an extra
I don't know if I've ever done
you got an
anything
extra 40.
120 hours in a week. I'm not disciplined, is what I'm
Sean,
saying.
there's 24 hours in a day. Come on.
Chop, chop. Maybe you're just more disciplined than I am, I think. But you're saying, so yes, like theoretically possible.
Theoretically, you
but it
could.
takes a
I
lot.
don't necessarily recommend it.
Yeah.
I think it would be much harder to go that route
Uh-huh.
because you just don't have that dedicated time to vote
Yeah, yeah.
to it.
I mean, as we discussed across this whole episode, it's obviously there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, more than I feel like I have to juggle on a daily
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can share either about, I know we can't say too much, we have to be a little tight-lipped, but anything about the future of Trezor or anything for the next level, next phase? Any hints or
Yeah, I
anything
mean,
like
I
that?
can't honestly, that's the other thing about working in industrial design, is most of the work that we do is kind of hush hush and
Yeah, it's a
sealed.
shh.
Yeah, yeah. We
Don't
can't really
tell
talk about it
anybody.
too much
Yeah.
just because of competition.
Mhm.
But I can say that we are working on a next generation of product, and hopefully, that will be released pretty soon.
Mhm.
I can't really say when, but yeah, we're constantly working on next gen, and I'm really excited about our next release. I think it's a really big leap for us,
Mhm.
and I can't wait to get it out there because the way it's coming along right now is just phenomenal. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it'll make a huge impact.
That's how I feel too. Things are happening. We can at least say that much. We are working. And
Yeah.
there is development.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you being able
Sure,
to
it
come
was
and
great.
sit down for a bit. You are
Yeah.
heading back to America tomorrow. So
I am getting on a plane tomorrow. Yeah,
I'm sure I'll see you again at some point.
yeah,
But,
I'll be back.
yeah, you're like Gandalf. You just kind of disappear for months at a time and then reappear when you're needed,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that.
Exactly.
With wise words.
I wish I
to
could
tell
just
you.
zap myself here rather
Yeah.
than sit on a plane for
Well,
11
you can
hours.
still get a horse.
No,
That's
thank
something you can do.
No, thank you.
We have a tradition that I never warn people about, but we awkwardly shake hands off mic.
Oh,
So we go like this,
okay.
and we just kind of
All right.
lean around, and people can tell by the audio if they're listening. It's a tradition that just happened out of nowhere, and
It's
I haven't
better than
even-
a high five. I'm so glad we didn't high five.
It's just impractical in these seats. It's too far away, so it makes sense. And then we can feel more manly by reaching really far. So yeah, but thank you so much. Appreciate you
Yeah.
coming on.
Great.
That's it for this episode, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys in the next one.